What's up, everybody? It's your girl, KTV, and I'm coming to you live from the Verdi EcoSchool. Welcome to our live virtual show, 21 Questions, where we bring police officers from around and across the nation to sit down and have serious talks about what's going on in today's society. I am an aspiring civil rights lawyer. I'm a junior in high school, and I'm an advisor to an amazing initiative called Hey Blue. Hey Blue has been facilitating meaningful connections between police officers and community members for about 2 years now. Here on 21 Questions, the officer, he or she, will be able to ask me 10 questions. I will be able to ask them 10 questions, and our 21st question will come from our viewers. Without further ado, I would like to introduce the candidate for Brevard County Sheriff, Mr. Alton Edmond.
Hello.
How are you?
All is well. How are you, Kairi?
I am great. Thank you for asking.
You are quite welcome.
Would you
So
mind?
are you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. Are you ready?
I'm ready. You know, I've been asked a million questions over the last few months while I've been campaigning. So I'm always ready to answer questions. Talk to me.
All right. So this is just side. This is not your first question.
Okay.
Are you willing to just introduce yourself and talk about the connections that you've made with the community and your experience with the Hey Blue initiative?
Absolutely. My name is Alton Edmond. I born and raised in Clewiston, Florida. I've had family here in Brevard County for generations. And after graduating from the University of Florida in Gainesville with my Bachelor of Arts in Criminology, Sociology, and a minor in education, and graduating from law school at Florida A&M College of Law, go Rattlers, go Gators, I moved here to Brevard County to work as an attorney here and to lead music ministry here in Brevard County as well. And so in the time that I've been here, since about 2013, I've been leading music ministries. I've been doing motivational speeches in schools through the Tied Together organization. I have helped to teach young men how to tie ties and give motivational speeches at pretty much every middle school and high school in Brevard County, except for a few outliers here and there. I own my own motivational speaking company. I own my own law practice. And in the community, I'm a part of a few different things. I am a board member for Emma Jewel Charter Academy, Go Warriors. I am a board member for City of Refuge Christian Center. I am a graduate 2019 of Leadership Brevard, best class ever. I am a board member of Big Brothers Big Sisters and a very adamant supporter of their Bigs with Badges program, which I look very forward to being a part of and partnering with as sheriff. I am also on the board for Hey Blue, and I am attorney for Verdi EcoSchool, which is something that you're probably familiar with, because if I look in your background, it looks like you might be on campus.
Yes.
Shout out to Verdi
behind me. I walked in and I was like, wow, you know what I mean? The library is amazing. That's amazing how you're connected with so many people and you're doing so much for the community. Thank you so much. I picked up that you were teaching young men to tie ties. And it, piqued my interest because not a lot of, young men know how to do that. And I'm like, I want to learn how to do that. I don't even know how to tie a tie. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
Of course, it's a pleasure. And one of the reasons why I'm so passionate about being a part of that is because I didn't know how to tie a tie until I was in college. And I learned how to tie a tie on YouTube. Unfortunately, my father wasn't really an active part of my life most of my childhood. And so when I began to sing in the University of Florida gospel choir, I started having to wear neckties regularly. And so I learned how to tie a necktie on YouTube. And now I'm good enough at it to teach other people how to do it. So I feel pretty confident in my abilities these days.
Just passing down the good karma. That's what I'm talking about.
Absolutely. Paying it forward.
Okay, Mr. Edmond, I would like to ask you your first question.
Okay.
And that would be, as a kid, what did you want to be growing up?
As a kid, I wanted to be a lawyer. I didn't quite know what a lawyer did. I didn't quite know what a lawyer was. because I actually never met a lawyer until I was maybe 12, 13 years old. And a attorney in my neighborhood actually bought a corner store, and I would see him there from time to time, maybe a few days a week. He would be at the store, and he kind of did it so that he could encourage young people in the community to aspire to greater heights. And so, but I wanted to be an attorney since I was 5 years old, and over time, I kind of developed the skills to believe that I could actually do it and do it well.
I've always wanted to be a doctor. Mm-hmm. I sat for a little bit. I was like, oh, I want to be a doctor, just like helping people. And just recently, I was like, ooh, I'm good at arguing. You know what I mean? But that wasn't like the only thing that drew me towards that field. It was the helping people and, you know, the justice, what's right, what's wrong. I really liked it. So I was like, hey, Dad, Mom, I think I want to be a civil rights attorney. And they were like, oh yeah, that suits you well. So I can see your interest in being a lawyer. It's amazing.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Listen, you can always be a doctor and argue with your patients. Now, you might not make a lot of money, but that's an avenue, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. I would like to ask you your second question. And that would be, did you ever have a negative or positive influence with the police officer that drove you to want to run for sheriff?
Yes. I've had a lot of both of those types of experiences. I could go down a laundry list of them, but I will give you one positive and one negative so that I don't take up too much time. A negative experience that I remember is when I was in Orlando. I lived in Orlando. I was in law school at the time, and a friend of mine and I were driving to a poetry show. These shows used to be on like Tuesday or Wednesday nights. It was a weekday evening, and it would start around 8 p.m. and it would go until maybe midnight. And my friend was driving. It was his car, and I was just a passenger riding along to this poetry event. And we got pulled over by Orlando PD on Colonial while we were headed to this place. And there were two officers in the car. One got out of the passenger side, one got out of the driver's side, and they walked around to the two sides of the car. And one officer greeted my friend on the driver's side, and the other officer approached me on the passenger side. Apparently, they had run the tag on the car, and they found that the driver of the vehicle, or owner of the vehicle, not the driver necessarily, but the owner of the vehicle had a suspended license. And that so happened to be my friend. Apparently he had a speeding ticket or something, and he had been so busy that he failed to pay it. And so his license got suspended. And so he was very apologetic. He felt really bad. And the officer, you know, ran his license and all of that good stuff. Well, here I was on the passenger side, and I had done nothing but be a passenger. Right. But the officer asked me for my driver's license, which I thought was unusual since I wasn't driving.
Right.
And when I opened up my wallet, there's something I carry in my wallet. And so when I open it up, right now you see my Florida bar card, but usually my license to carry a concealed weapon is visible in my wallet. I've actually changed the way that my wallet is assembled so that my license to carry a concealed weapon is now hidden because of this experience. Because when the officer saw that I had a license to carry a concealed weapon, he immediately drew his gun and he said, "Do you have a gun on you?" Well, the thought in my mind was, duh, I have a license to carry one lawfully. Right. But that wasn't his mind frame. And so I said, "Yes, I do." He asked, "Where is it?" I said, "It's on my hip in a holster." He said, "Don't reach for it. Put your hands where I can see them." And he made me get out of the car. And so I stepped out of the car ever so gingerly to make sure that I didn't give him a reason to hurt me. And he took my weapon that I was licensed to carry off of my hip, and he took it to his car, and he ran the serial number to see if my weapon was stolen. And after he checked my weapon and cleared it, he then put it in the trunk of the car, closed the trunk, and he gave my friend a break, probably because he knew that he had just violated my constitutional rights.
right.
By illegally confiscating my weapon without cause, and performing a search on my weapon without cause. And so what he did was he took my friend's license, and they allowed me to switch over into the driver's seat since I had a valid driver's license. And I took over the driving duties for the rest of the evening. And that we went to the poetry show. We ended up having a decent time, but I've never forgotten that evening when an officer pulled a gun on me for being a passenger in the car.
Right.
And I felt like my life was in danger simply for riding in a car with a friend of mine who forgot to pay a speeding ticket. I thought I was going to die that night, and I never want anyone else to feel that way, especially when they've done nothing wrong like I did on that evening. I've never had a criminal history. I've never even had a speeding ticket, and so I didn't imagine the officer pulling a gun on me the way that he did, but he did. In terms of good experience, because I know that's a kind of dark topic. In terms of a good experience, I had this officer. His name was Officer Woody, who was the resource officer at my school, and he was very, very supportive, especially of sports and student athletes. And so when I played football, we can count on him to be at every game. When I wrestled, oftentimes we would see him at games as well. And my senior year of high school, when we got to play in the state championship game, he traveled in plain clothes to be there with my team as we competed for the state championship title in the Miami Dolphins Stadium before it was demolished and they built a new one. And so it was a pretty amazing feeling, and he was right there for it every step of the way.
To comment on your negative experience first, because that was beautiful. I could just imagine what was going through your head, especially being a man of color, young man of color, having a gun pulled on you. You know what I mean? Following the rules, doing everything you're supposed to be doing. And as soon as you said that he came over and, asked you for your license, and I was thinking, well, you're not driving the car, you know what I mean? So, wow.
Yeah.
That's just, sitting in my stomach. I'm sort of like, I know I would feel like antagonized. I wouldn't know what to do.
It was a heck of an experience. It really was. And I'm grateful that things didn't take a turn for the worst, or didn't denigrate from where they are and get worse than they were, because that was a pretty scary experience. But I'm thankful because there are a lot of people that have been in that situation that have not survived.
Right.
Rolando Castile is a very famous example of someone who was pulled over under similar circumstances, except for he was the driver, a simple traffic infraction. And he was asked to show his license and registration, which he did. He began to reach for his license and registration, and he was killed after he said that he had a gun. He had a license to carry the gun. He reached for his wallet like the officer told him to do, and he's not alive today as a result, even though he complied and did everything the officer commanded him to do.
Right.
I'm just thankful that wasn't my story that night.
That's shocking. I'm sort of still in shock because I know I just, but on your on the positive note, your connection. I wish like my resource officer at my school would have been so keen on building connection, especially with all the kids, going to my basketball games and things like that, being able to talk to him before. That's amazing. And him even going with you guys, that shows like that's a bond that most kids nowadays don't have. Yeah, I admire that a lot.
It's a beautiful thing, I think. And I think the issue sometimes is that law enforcement officers are not all the times really screened properly to determine whether they should be school resource officers or not.
Right.
There are some times, and I've run into quite a few of them traveling to different schools and whatnot, but there are sometimes officers that really don't have the patience or personality or temperament to be able to deal with kids on a regular basis.
Right.
And those are not the type of people that should be resource officers in school. And unfortunately, I don't know what the screening process is, but that's not always a topic of importance or area of importance.
Right.
And so you get people that don't even like kids, places, resource officers in schools, and sometimes as a result, you get a bad result, and
Right.
and people wonder why. Well, we had a good one, thankfully.
That's good. Mr. Edmond, I would like to ask your third question, and that would be, as you stated before, you're in a position of knowing a lot about law as an attorney. Has this changed your views on policies throughout the nation and Brevard County today?
Absolutely. The truth is that, even from studying with my bachelor's program at the University of Florida, I've been studying policy. I've been studying law enforcement. I've been studying the criminal justice system since 2007. And, so for the last 13 years, I've really been engrossed in very intensive study of the criminal justice system. And as a result, I've developed a lot of thoughts and concerns as it relates to policies in law enforcement, especially when it comes to de-escalation policies, use of force policies, and things like that. When we see the way that use of force is done in America, it's clear to me that it's not necessarily done right or taught right or trained right, because many people often, when they're pulled over, even for a simple traffic infraction, they encounter an officer that approaches their car with the gun drawn or their hand
Right.
on the gun already. Well, as we know, most of the interactions when it comes to traffic stops are nonviolent, and officers almost never have to use their guns in those circumstances. But many officers, approach that circumstance as if the person that they're approaching is a threat every time, unfortunately. And so many people, when they experience a simple traffic stop, it becomes, instead of something that's relatively simple, I pay my ticket, you give me a ticket, and I go.
Right.
It becomes an adversarial and even intimidating process for an average citizen who is deathly afraid of that weapon being used to harm them when they may have made a rolling stop and gone past the stop bar, or they may have gone across that center line and failed to maintain lane very momentarily before they corrected it. And now because of that, they're facing an officer with their hand on their gun. And now that situation that was very simple is now life and death.
Right.
Policies like that are policies that I've thought about a lot and formed opinions about in my study of the law. And there are a lot of others too, but I don't want to spend too much time on that.
No, it's okay. I agree with everything that you had to say, especially down to the de-escalation and the way that it's presented and taught in law enforcement school. You know what I mean? When you go to training, how are they training you? What are they training you on? Are they learning more things on one side than they are on the other? You know what I mean? Yeah, I agree. It needs a little more work. So question 4 would be, what sayings did you hear in your household growing up the most from your parents?
Well, my dad wasn't really in the household, so I didn't really hear much from him aside from silence, maybe. But my mom, I would say that one of the things that she said to me all the time was, "I love you," which is very important. And another thing that she said all the time was, "Make good decisions." My mom always reiterated to me when I was getting ready to leave for the day to go to school or wherever, make good choices. And that led me to be an individual that was very cognizant about his choices and his decision making. And so I'm always thinking every day when I leave my house, every experience, every interaction that I have, I'm always thinking about my choices. I'm thinking about the potential consequences for my actions. And I'm thankful that my mom's sayings or lessons every day in terms of making good choices stuck with me. And so because of that, I'm proud that, I've never had an interaction with law enforcement that led to me being in handcuffs and going to jail. I'm glad that I, don't have some of the issues that I've seen some of my classmates experience since we graduated from high school, and even while we were in high school, because of those lessons that my mom taught me and those sayings that she had.
I think my parents, my mom's not, she doesn't really quote things. She'll just like, go on about something. My dad is more of the person who will sort of like give me a day-to-day quote. And when you're talking about choice, my dad always tells me, even when you're not making a choice, you still made a choice. So I hear that one in my household a lot. Also, I hear a hard head makes a soft behind. He tells me that one very often. So just growing up, being thankful for listening, like you're saying, has taken me out of situations like that, even at school or just at a grocery store or something like that. So I can most definitely relate.
My Aunt Brenda used to say that all the time. A hard head makes a soft butt. Never forget that.
Okay. Question number 5. What is your opinion or your thoughts about Amy Coney Barrett taking her seat on the Supreme Court Monday afternoon?
I was pretty disappointed about that. I don't have a lot of qualms with her specifically. I don't know her as an individual, don't know her as a person. She could be a great person.
Right.
But I think back to 2015, 2016, when former President Obama was preparing to leave the office, and he had maybe a year left in his term. And I believe Justice Scalia passed away, and there was a seat open, and the Republicans in Congress basically blocked him from being able to nominate or appoint someone to fill that seat, which as a president is within his power and authority to do. And without good reason, they're not supposed to do that, according to the Constitution. But, those congressmen and women violated the Constitution and stripped the president of his power to appoint a justice for that seat. And those same congressmen and women, years later, just 4 or 5 short years later, now insisted upon putting their selection into a seat with much less time, just a month before the election. They jammed the person into the seat, into a lifetime appointment. And so, I think it shows the hypocrisy in politics. And I'm very disappointed in that because, one, I think it was a violation of the Constitution when it was done in the way that it was done in 2016. Right. But to see those people make that argument that the new president should be the one to select that justice, and now turn around and do the very thing that they frowned upon, 5 short years ago. Yeah, it's something it bothers me, to say the least.
Well, even though I'm only 17 years old, wanting to be an attorney has given me a lot of options in wanting to study law, and surrounding myself with people like me. My friends and I, my peers, we were debating on whether, that was something that was just hypocritical, or if it was something that they were rushing because it was like, we've got to get someone to fill the seat. And my friend, she had mentioned former President Obama. And she was like, no, I remember when Justice Scalia passed, and they were like, no. And then just in, 2 short weeks, it was, so uproar.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a shame, because generally the vetting process for a judicial candidate takes weeks or even months.
Time, yes.
There are all sorts of interviews. Usually they come before the houses of Senate, and different committees are able to ask them questions and different things like that. There are a lot of things that generally happen before a justice is normally seated, but the process was rushed and done in a very summary fashion. And so now it kind of is what it is. It's done now. That just is appointed for life. And all I can do is hope that she respects the Constitution and does what is fair and is just, regardless of her, political leanings. But we'll see. We'll see as time passes what happens.
All right. So question 6 would be, do you feel as if African Americans reclaiming the N-word is something that it's a good influence on our community, or do you believe it makes us ignorant?
I don't know. I go back and forth. I go back and forth on that because, of course, that word has been used to demoralize, to subjugate, and to humiliate people for generations. And so it's not a word that I necessarily, think is the best to use. I would be lying if I said I haven't used it and don't use it from time to time. But I think that the way that word has been used has been overwhelmingly negative. But I also think that when you reclaim or repurpose a thing, you can take away some of the sting from it, and it can be more positive. And I think that's one of the things that has happened by reclaiming that word. Many communities find themselves much less offended by the use of that word than they would have been, decades ago.
Right.
So I think that in reclaiming that word, it's taken a lot of power and sting from the use of that word. And I think that is a good thing. But whether, there are complexities that come along with that, because when one group uses that word and uses that word regularly, then it makes it seem to other groups as if it's okay for them to use that word as well. And so that's when there become issues. And so reclaiming a word, I think, takes some power away from that word, but it also opens the door for other people that are not Black to feel comfortable using that word. And that I've seen create conflicts, because even myself, I'll be completely transparent with you. When I hear a Black person use that word, generally, my assumption is that they don't mean harm by that word, because, that they don't mean harm by that word. But someone else using that word, I don't necessarily always give them the same benefit of the doubt.
Right. I can see where you're coming from. I lean more towards not using it. And that's only because if you were to, take something else that doesn't belong somewhere, if it's used for something, you wouldn't use a hammer to unscrew a screw from a wall. But I agree. I can completely see where you're coming from. I would lean more towards not using it, only because of all the negative connotation that came with it. So, but I agree. So, question 7. How do you perceive the mental health of young Black men and women in society today, in our nation?
I think the first word that comes to mind is stigma. Mental health in the Black community, and even just treatment by doctors in general, has many stigmas attached to it in the African American community. And I understand why. When we think back in history, when we think back to the Tuskegee experiments and things like that have happened in history, people of color don't have a very healthy history of relationship between them and medical professionals. Studies show even today that Black women are more likely to die giving birth.
Yes.
Because doctors are less likely to believe them when they say that they're experiencing pain or when they are experiencing discomfort. And so, there are a lot of reasons why people in the Black community don't have very good relationships with medical professionals and medical history. But there's a major stigma for a lot of different reasons, including that historical context. And so a lot of people in the Black community, I think, have very negative feelings about having medical treatment and mental health treatment. And I rarely ever hear in casual conversation with anyone of color, people talk about receiving counseling or mental health treatment or anything like that.
Right. I have to agree with you when you said stigma. That was a really great way to explain it, especially being a young Black female in high school. Even asking for help from a teacher gets really complicated sometimes because there's been a stigma, a prejudice around that. If you're a student athlete like myself, it's, you're only in school because you're good at basketball. You know what I mean? So why do you want to know? Why are you bothering me? What is it? Okay, get a C and move on. You know what I mean? So growing up from elementary school to now, there's just a lot that has gone into that. So I have to agree. I also agree with that comment. I do agree. It takes a lot of people to understand that mental health is a really big issue. And I think today in society, it's more of a physical appearance. If you're okay on the outside and there's really nothing going on the inside, and that's not the case.
Right.
So.
if your mental health issues are showing on the outside visibly, then it's probably gone untreated for far too long.
Right.
I've seen clients in that situation. Unfortunately, I've defended clients that had mental health problems, and when they went to the Orange County Jail or the Brevard County Jail, they were denied their medication, and their situation regressed and got even worse. And so by the time I came onto the case and began representing them, their hair was disheveled. They had blank stares. They sometimes could barely speak and respond to questions because that medication kept their hormones and whatnot in check. And once they stopped taking their medication or were denied their medication, their functions were completely unbalanced.
Right.
Unfortunately.
That's unfortunate. So question 8 would be, do you feel as if hate speech should be protected under the First Amendment?
Yes and no. I am a very strong proponent of constitutional rights, including the freedom of speech, First Amendment. But it depends on the type of hate speech, because the law actually has exceptions to the rules. There are certain types of speech that are not constitutionally protected.
Correct.
And one category of speech that is not constitutionally protected are fighting words, or words that may lead or likely to lead to rioting or fighting or violence. And so I think when it comes to some hate speech, if it fits within the categories of speech that incites violence or rioting or something like that, then obviously that's something that I wouldn't agree with. But, generally speaking, I believe that any speech that is not leading to violence or violating someone else's rights should be protected, and of course, there are always exceptions to rules. But, generally speaking, I support speech. And I'll give you a quick example. Maybe a year or two ago, there was a white supremacist and a leader of a neo-Nazi group that booked a space at the University of Florida campus to do a speech to his constituents. Now, those that know anything about Gainesville know that there is an active branch of the KKK in Gainesville, and there are hate groups in that area, just like there are some here in Brevard County. But he chose Gainesville as one of the areas to come and do his speech, and he booked the auditorium like anyone would. And a lot of people reached out to me because they knew me to be a legal professional, and they wanted to know my opinion. What do you think about this guy coming to our campus to spread his hate speech and his message of hate? And then I learned about counter protesters that reserve tickets so that they can go sit in the auditorium, and then as the guy begins speaking, make noise so that his speech couldn't be heard. And what I said was, I support the free speech for him to book the auditorium and come and give his presentation. But I also support the free speech of protest for those people to book their tickets and to come and to drown out that hate speech that they disagree with. Unfortunately, we live in a political climate where that's not always something that's respected. I remember in 2016 when our president was running for office, I remember seeing videos of people dragged out of rallies because they were protesting or they spoke up against the presidential candidate at the time, and they were removed because their speech and protest was not accepted. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that you have a right to speak and you should be given that right, but people have a right to protest as well.
Right. I agree. And leading into question 9, how do you feel about the Supreme Court just recently announcing, I do believe it was a few months ago, that they're going to be trying to refine the Second Amendment?
I'll be quite honest with you. I've been on the campaign trail, and so that specific ruling by the Supreme Court is not something I know a whole lot about. I've heard about it, but I haven't read into the weeds of it. As an attorney, when I read something, I usually put aside hours to read into something of that depth or magnitude. Like when it comes to the amendments that were on the ballot for Florida, I did hours of research into those amendments to see what they were about, to see and understand what the purpose of them was. And I did that and took aside that time because I was going to be voting on it. As it relates to the Supreme Court, the decision that they make is something that may not happen for months from now. So, or even years from now, and so that's not something I've read up on, to be quite honest with you. Okay.
I just thought I would ask because I've heard that you're very pro Second Amendment. And yeah, so I just wanted to get your opinion on them trying to refine it and go back and fine tune it. So, but thank you for your answer. I appreciate it.
Oh, yeah, no problem. So I don't, in terms of the Second Amendment, I'm a very avid supporter. And by refine or to fine tune, I'm not sure exactly what that means. And so, there are a lot of things that fine tuning a constitutional amendment could mean.
Right.
It could relate to the age, the minimum age.
Right.
It could relate to mental health requirements. It could relate to the ability to, how they're transported, whether you can take them, or ship them on planes in the undercarriage, or how you ship them. It could be a lot of different things, all the way down to what type of weapon, how many rounds in the magazine are allowed, what accessories are allowed. It could mean a whole variety of different things when it comes to fine tuning. That's a very broad term. And so it's really hard for me to really answer that question, but I would be interested in seeing what they come up with and forming an opinion on that when the time comes.
I agree. Okay. So my last question for you, question 10. What is so great about connection in your opinion? And can you tell us a little bit about the people around you who you built connections with, who have pushed you forward in being a better person?
Absolutely. What's so great about connection? So connection is required for growth, in my opinion. And I think that the reason why is because people that think differently than you challenge your beliefs and push you to either have greater conviction about your beliefs or push you to change your beliefs when you have reason to believe that your beliefs are wrong. And I have quite a few people that push me. My closest friend in the whole world, Julius Wynn. He's someone that challenges my beliefs all the time, especially when it comes to relationships. He's about the same age, just a few months older than I am. But he's married and he has 2 children. And so even though we're very close to age, where we are in life is very different. I think I might be much further along in terms of my career and education, but he's much further along when it comes to his family goals and things like that. And so he challenges me a lot. My Aunt Brenda, she's someone that challenges me. She's probably the strongest person that I know. She's endured so much and has overcome so much. And so she's challenged me in many ways because, you know, when I face hardship and when I face things and I think that, you know, I might give up, I think about all that she's endured, and I pull myself up by the bootstraps and I keep going. And the list goes on and on. I've been challenged by so many people and have so many awesome connections in my life. I'm just incredibly blessed. I could go on all night, but I won't bore you with that at this time.
That's amazing. We during basketball at home with my parents, my peers, my friends, a word that always comes up is adversity. When I think of connection, I think of adversity, building those connections, because, you know, challenging beliefs can be a little hard sometimes. You know, when you believe a certain thing and someone's telling you something different, it gets a little messy. But I can agree with everything that you said. And I think
I appreciate that.
You're welcome. Okay, so that's it for my 10 questions. You'll get a chance to ask me your 10 questions, but I would like to have a word from our sponsors. So I would like to thank the CenterState Bank, Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream, Exceed Concierge, Big Brothers and Big Sisters of Florida, the Verdi EcoSchool. Thank you guys so much. And the Hey Blue Initiative for bringing this episode of 21 Questions. Thanks. Okay, so
Awesome.
Alton, it's your turn. I'm ready. I'm listening. Throw them
Are
out.
you ready?
Yes.
You know, I ask people tough questions for a living, right?
All right. Yeah, I got it.
Right. So, question number 1. I think this will probably be the simplest of the questions that I ask you. You told me that you want to be an attorney. Why?
Okay. So great question. As I told you before, I used to want to be a pediatric surgeon, to specify what field I wanted to go into, the medical field. And I just realized that I was better at debating in such ways as just because I wanted civil rights to further branch off into that, because I thought it was really important as me as a young Black woman to know my rights. Especially coming up in, you know, the American school system, learning about slavery and everything that went on. And I don't know if you've seen the last episode of 21 Questions, but Commander Mark Claycomb had asked me what prejudice I had faced. And being a kid in first grade, I remember my answer was my head being slammed to a water fountain by these 2 white girls who had decided to follow me from lunch because of the color of my skin. And I wanted to know more on, you know, can they do that? You know what I mean? And I got a little interested. And then growing up, I started to realize I like learning about the law. I like knowing what someone can and they can't do, whether it's in criminal defense, family law, civil rights, medicine, anything. So that's sort of what drove me to be an attorney, was my experiences with prejudice. And yeah.
Awesome. I had some similar experiences that led me down that path as well, seeing a lot of interesting things at a very young age because of the community that I was raised in. Question number 2, you talked about your interest in learning about the law. What law would you say interests you the most, and why?
Great question. What law would I say interests me the most, and why? There's so many of them. One law that interests me the most would probably be child support, paying on child support. I know that there are a lot of fathers, including my own, which, you know, I get the experience, you know, because he was put on child support by his ex-wife. And he wants to be there for his kids. And there's a lot of fathers out there who want to help raise a kid and who want to help raise their firstborn, secondborn, whatever it is. And the mother decides just because the male no longer wants to be with her, it's like, I'm going to throw you on child support. So you can't see your kid. You can't stay in the same household as me. And I get, a certain amount of your income. I felt that wasn't fair because I see how hard my father works to want to be in his children's lives. And I know that there's a lot of kids who grow up without fathers. So I think it's too easy to just go, to court and say, oh, he got me pregnant. He wasn't here. He doesn't pay, and going through that whole process. So I think that's one law that really interests me. And that's one law that I would really like to change because I think it's way too easy to throw somebody on child support by just she say, he say. So.
Yeah, that is an interesting one. And I think that if you want to change that, you would do better to change that law by working in the legislature as an elected official than as an attorney. Because family law is, for the most part, very much codified in the statute. And so people that practice family law, for the most part, they know the statutes. Right. Right off the top of their head. Right. I could tell you a lot about the law. I could tell you a lot about different types of law. But, unless it's something that I do or see on a regular basis, I can't tell you an exact statute number. But, for family law, that's something that's really important. And just kind of staying along the topic of law and kind of my role of working to become sheriff. I'm wondered, and I'm kind of curious, what has been your most positive experience with law enforcement? What would you say has been?
My most positive experience with law enforcement would probably have to be, I have a best friend and her dad is a police officer. So he'd come home every day and, when I was over her house, he would tell us stories about going out, kids that he's helped, ice cream he's got, cars that he's bought, and seeing that officer in my life, I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. The Hey Blue initiative actually, though, really opened my eyes to an amazing group of officers who care so much about their community. Because besides my friend's dad, I really never had an officer want to know my name or my favorite color or the books that I like to read. So those are positive influences and connections that I've made so far. And I'm thankful for Hey Blue for that.
Awesome. Now, you kind of gave me a really good segue into my next question, because you talked about an officer wanting or caring about the type of books that you like to read. Now, as an attorney, we have to do a whole lot of reading. I remember in law school, sometimes I would have to read 500-600 pages a night to prepare for class the next day. What is your favorite type of reading to do?
Probably expanding my mind. I don't really like the books like Harry Potter. Wasn't interested in it at all. Everyone goes fangirl, fanboy crazy over it. And I'm like, I sort of like the books that have to deal with crime or mystery, civil rights, that too. Psychology, something that'll make me smarter by, taking it in. I hate reading at school. I know that's a little iffy, but it's only because I feel like the information that I'm being given, I've learned so many times over and over again. And I'm the type of reader, if it doesn't catch my attention, or if I can't put myself in the character's shoes, I won't touch the book. So.
Yeah, I think the law school reading, if you really like the law, it can be really interesting, because I still remember some cases that I studied back in law school. For example, the tort law age at which someone can be charged with a tort. I believe that the general age is somewhere around 7, is the youngest that you can be charged with a tort. And the case law came from this little kid that pulled a chair from under a lady that was, somewhat hefty in her build, and she fell and broke her hip. And the question was whether he could be charged with a tort as a 7-year-old kid, whether he had the mental capacity to be able to form the intent to commit a tort. And so, things like that, different cases like that, that you might stumble across could interest you, and you remember for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
If the law is really your passion. So make sure before you go to law school, before you spend all of that money and invest all of that time, that that's really for you. And if it is, I encourage you 100% to do it.
Thank you.
Now, I talked to you about what your most positive experience was with law enforcement. What was your most negative?
My most negative would have to be, I had a friend. Now that Hey Blue, I actually have about the same amount of negative as I do positive. I was in the cafeteria one time, and a boy was spreading rumors about me, or whatever you want to say. And I went up to him, and, I was ready to confront him, not in a forceful way, not in an aggressive way. I just wanted to sit down and be like, hey, you you misunderstood what I was saying. Can we please sit down, and can we please talk about it? Is there any way that I can help to clarify the situation? I had an administrator and a resource officer follow me around the cafeteria and tell me that I was being loud and that I was aggressive, and that if I didn't stop speaking with my hands, that they were going to have to send me to the dean's office and call my parents. They were ready to detain me. And so I was like, I'm just talking, and they were like, no, you have to sit down. So I ended up sitting down in the cafeteria, and I ended up getting back up because I went to go sit with a cousin of mine through marriage, and she's white. And I sat next to her, and I was telling her what was going on. And so the officer comes over, and he goes, well, what did I just tell you? To stop being loud. I told you stop being obnoxious. And I go, I'm speaking to my cousin. And he goes, you guys aren't cousins. And I was like, it's my cousin through marriage. We go to the same school. That was a negative experience I had. Another one was I had a friend of mine whose sister was being sexually harassed through social media. And him and I are really good friends. And he went to the school, told the little boy to stop, everything like that. They went through the motions, and the school just wasn't doing anything about it. Now, big bro is upset because he's seeing his little sister be, harassed through social media. He's touching her in school. So fair enough, a fight breaks out. But this was weeks after it was like, hey, this situation has been brought up, deal with it. They were ready to charge him with battery. The white kid, of course, got off. It wasn't his fault or anything like that. They ended up detaining my best friend, and, the parents were like, we don't know anything about this. The school denied it and everything. Resource officer was like, I haven't heard any allegations of this. And so my best friend, he ended up getting in trouble. And, watching that, seeing that, them sitting on his back with, their knees and detaining him, it was like, oh my gosh, you know what I mean? So I've had a lot of negative experiences, but yeah.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I hate to see people discriminated against, whatever the situation is. Many people might look at you and see your involvement in these different initiatives as activism, community activism. I really like that word. What inspired you to be a community activist and get involved in the way that you have?
Just seeing my peers, Black, white, Asian, Hispanic, doesn't matter your ethnicity of your race, seeing them being treated unfairly or having an opinion about something. I'm an extrovert, so I like to talk. I had a friend, she was followed into the bathroom dealing with her, lady problems, and an administrator followed her in there, and she was not violating dress code at all. And it was your race and your race, ethnicity, and your body type makes that outfit provocative. So we're going to throw you in the dean's office. And just seeing things like that, whether it's someone being bullied in the hallway to somebody just casually having a conversation. And it's like, I don't really know how to explain it. I just have this drive. My parents see it to help people, and whoever doesn't have a strong enough voice, I'm excited. I'm like, oh, I'm ready to step in and defend you. So I've had a lot of those experiences, and that's really what drove me. Miss Lori, hi. I interned at a law firm Crutchfield, Wilson, and Piles, and they took me in. And over the summer, I've been doing a whole bunch of law stuff. So I love Miss Lori. Thank you for watching. So yeah, to answer your question.
It's weird hearing you call her Miss Lori, because she's actually a friend of mine. I know her. And I know Corey Powers very well. He's one of my colleagues, and we cover cases for each other from time to time.
Wow, small world.
So, right. So people that you call Miss are contemporaries for me. But I mean, you know, it is what it is. I feel like the old guy. Thank you so much for drawing that out. I'm gonna go get me some Fixodent now. And, we've talked about law enforcement quite a bit within a school context and from your personal perspective. What would you say is the general perspective of law enforcement in the community that you live in?
Do you mean through biases that they have, things that they've been brought up on? Or are you just saying in general what the goal of being an officer in Brevard County means? So
what would you say is the perception of law enforcement by the community that you live in? What would you say?
There's a few of my peers and their parents who feel it's amazing. There's nothing to change. It's great. My peers, in my opinion, is that they fail to, create connections. I feel like there's a lot of kids that they could be talking to. You don't just go to your job every day and it's like, let me go to work. But I feel like if it's not something you love, then why are you doing it? You know what I mean? Besides protecting, I feel like it should be going out, playing basketball. You see a game going, it's like, hey guys, what's the score? Can I jump in? You know what I mean? Creating that connection. So the perception is pretty split down the middle.
Okay.
That's hard to answer. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Now, with the perception split down the middle and about 50-50, what do you think could be done to improve the way that your community thinks about law enforcement?
Connection. I think, again, being able to understand both sides of the story, especially when you're in it, you know what I mean? Because as an officer, you're making really tough decisions. De-escalation tactics, it's, you're thinking a certain way and you've got to follow certain guidelines to handle a situation. A lot of the community, I feel, doesn't understand that about an officer. But at the same time, I feel like an officer needs to be able to step away from his badge or her badge and be like, well, hang on a second. That's still a person too. If I was in this situation, I would be really anxious. You know what I mean? So connection, I believe, because there's no other way to put it. Just education and learning each other is really important.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And Pebbles, appreciate that positivity. To go back to what you were talking about a little bit before about that perception and how some people think law enforcement are great, they can do no wrong, and some people have some really negative experiences. That's something that I've run up against quite a bit in my race for sheriff, because I can see a lot of the bad things that law enforcement do on a day-to-day basis, because I've experienced them and I've been in the position of someone that has been discriminated against and even harassed by law enforcement.
Right.
I find it interesting that some people who have only had positive experiences with law enforcement have a hard time really empathizing with or understanding or even caring about people that have had negative experiences simply because they haven't had those experiences. I think it's important to step outside of yourself and try to put yourself in other people's shoes when you can.
I agree.
And it's unfortunate that a lot of people just seem to lack the ability to be able to do that. But I won't talk your head off, because I have one more question. Question number 10 from me. Now, this one, I saved probably my favorite question for last. We've talked about law enforcement. We've talked about your career and what you want to do. And we've even talked about politics a little bit, kind of came into the picture. I'm curious as to your thoughts now about family and your future family. As you're a junior in high school and you're coming into adulthood, I imagine that you might have some thoughts from time to time about family. Hopefully not too many.
Not too many. Dad would kill me. Dad would kill me.
Right. But I think that, you might have at some point had some thoughts about family. And when you think about having children one day and having a family of your own, what thoughts come to mind when you consider the current political, social, and even racial climate? Now, I want to give you an example of my answer because I want to make sure that the question is not phrased in a confusing way.
Okay.
I worry sometimes about my future family, about my children, and my ability to keep them safe. Because we live in a world where we have some great people in it that want to improve our world and see it become better. But we live in a world that can also be very dangerous. And so what are your feelings and thoughts when you think about a family of your own and we consider what's going on in the world right now?
I have to agree with what you said. Seeing George Floyd in the neck hold, really, it made me cry because I thought bringing life into this world as an African-American woman, I have to worry about my son or my daughter not misbehaving, but somebody taking it in a negative connotation, like, what if that's my son? You know what I mean? Well, how do I explain to my son that his white best friend isn't going to get in trouble for the same thing that they might do together just because of the color of my son's skin? You know what I mean? How do I raise him to be better than the stereotype when they just keep coming and coming? And how do I raise my daughter to understand that her natural curls are something she should love and not hate, and that she shouldn't have to straighten her hair all the time? I feel sometimes oppressed in that sense, just to being even scared to start a family, because it's like there's so much going on today that it's how do you protect when there's no way to protect, and the environment for your race or ethnicity is no longer safe, even through social media. You know what I mean? So I think it's important to educate, because if I can get it to them before they can get it from somebody else, at least they might have a better understanding.
Absolutely. And I imagine that it's a pretty hopeless situation when you are in a position where you feel like you have to protect your family or yourself from the people that are supposed to be protecting you. And what do you do? What do you do when the people that are supposed to protect you are a danger to you?
Right.
How can you protect yourself against them? Unfortunately, the law doesn't really create a lot of room for citizens protecting themselves against their protectors when it comes to law enforcement. And so my goal really is to make sure as sheriff that we are training and equipping and preparing and giving our deputies everything that they need to be effective community guardians to protect the interest and the safety of the public.
That's how it should be. That's exactly how it should be. All right. That was our 20th question. Now, this is the last question, our 21st question. Now, this question can be to me, it can be to you, it can be to both of us, and it's going to come from our audience. So awesome. Let's see what our question was going to be. Okay. How will you work to make deputies better suited to handle people with mental illnesses? Alton, that is for you.
You sure you don't want to take this one?
I'm all good.
So I've answered this question quite a bit. And the situation that comes to mind, of course, is the Gregory Edwards situation. The current sheriff just went to court today as related to that situation. And his team has delayed the release of the video of what happened to that man while he was in custody of the sheriff and the Brevard County Sheriff's Department. To work to make deputies better suited to handle people with mental illnesses, I would take a page from the book of Fort Lauderdale, because the wife of that veteran told me about a situation where her husband had a PTSD episode when they lived in Fort Lauderdale, similar to the one that he had here in Brevard. And the way that they handled it is that they had a special team that responded to the scene, and they had on scrubs like medical professionals. And they probably had weapons, but those weapons were concealed. And the reason why is because people with certain mental illnesses like PTSD, for example, might see an officer with a gun and a bulletproof vest, and they might think that someone's coming to hurt them. And that's a very dangerous situation to put someone in when they're suffering from a mental illness. And so to have a team that's specially equipped and trained to be able to respond to people that have mental health issues and mental illnesses such as PTSD would really be my goal. I want to have nurses and law enforcement deputies and different people work as a team to resolve situations like that, so that when people are, suffering from mental health issues and law enforcement are called to respond to the situation, those law enforcement deputies are, have the tools and the different people on their team to make sure that that person is encountered and that issue is dealt with in a way that protects the public from that person, that protects that person from themselves, and protects the deputies from that person as well, so that those situations are resolved, and that person is maybe taken to a mental health facility like Circles of Care, for example, to receive treatment, as opposed to jail or the hospital like Gregory Edwards, so they don't end up deceased, unfortunately, like Gregory Edwards did.
Alton, that was an amazing response. Haley, thank you for the question. That was an amazing question, because I was wondering the same thing. So thank you for that. But all right, Alton, that's it. That's 21 questions. Thank you so much for thank you so much for joining me today and having these tough conversations.
I would agree with that guy. Thank you, Jeremy.
Thank you for being here. We really appreciate it. But before you go, I have one last question for you.
What's up?
Do we still have love for each other? You still got love for me, Alton?
Wait a minute. That's 22 questions now. What's going on here? There's something going on.
I never thought I couldn't throw a bonus in there.
Listen, we still have love for each other. I appreciate the opportunity to answer your questions. I thank you for answering my questions. And, maybe someday soon, I can come back onto this show as your sheriff and answer more specific questions that you might have for the sheriff of Brevard County, Florida.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for being here. All right, guys. Well, that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. I'd like to give a shout out to the sponsors again: CenterState Bank, Exceed Concierge, Hey Blue, the Hey Blue Initiative, Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream, and Verdi EcoSchool. Thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Next episode, stay tuned. That's a good one. Thank you guys. Bye.